Here we go. Hey, it's Friday, everybody.
Here.
It's Friday, one day closer, several days closer to the start of CMMC Phase 1. What is it officially by the calendar? 59 days left? 60 days?
See, I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, something like that.
It's a 60-day delay until it's in effect, but there's a weekend, and so they put it on the 10th. So as far as the calendar goes, I think it's 60 days, 59 days. It's not a lot of time. It's like 1,400 hours or something like that. Anyways, it's Friday. It's the Q&A. He's Daniel. I'm Jacob. We do this every Friday. We're taking your questions live on YouTube, on LinkedIn. You can go to CUIHotline.org and call the number. Our team was just out at Billington, and we had the red phone, the famous red phone. People left a ton of messages on the number out there, which is going to be awesome to sort through. You can also fill out the form out there and submit questions. We've got a ton of questions about the final rule, what's going on. There's questions from Reddit, from LinkedIn. There's all kinds of stuff going on, plus just the questions that the government answered directly in the public comment section of the final rule. So let's get started. Daniel,
good.
You want to talk about backlogs?
I do. So as anticipated this week in a post-48 world, the amount of people that have magically decided to move forward on engagements with us has jumped significantly. And so it just, again, you just have to wonder, it's like, hey, is there really going to be a mad rush in a post CMMC world, right? And the short answer is yes. So a lot of you kind of that have been waiting in the wings, or maybe your executives have paused on this and, finally getting ready to get started, make sure to ask the backlog to start an engagement, because a lot of those are starting to tick up, right? Because the volume of people finally making a decision, because CMMC is now real. Now, here's what's funny about it. The people that are kind of signing up right now are still the people, what I would call in the echo chamber. They listen to our stuff. They're probably on the CUI hotline, like you guys are right now. They're subscribed to newsletters and blogs and all of that stuff. So they would be very educated, right? So the flag went up. They said, we've got to sign. We cannot wait any longer. What I'm really concerned about, Jacob, you and I have talked about this, is the real shaking of the industry, and the mass level of awareness will not come through somebody seeing a 48 CFR post, because a lot of people are just look at that and be like, what the heck? Right. The big awakening is going to be when somebody like Lockheed releases an update to their blog. So if you haven't done something and you want to do something, the real awakening will be when the primes start communicating this. I talked to somebody this week, and they said one of our operating companies actually lost work with a prime because they could not show enough progress against CMMC. And so they were like, we can no longer give you work. And this is, again, pre-November 10th, right? It being a requirement contractually. And so I say all this to say, backlogs are starting to stack already 3 days into this news, right? Which is crazy to say. If you're waiting 30 days, or if you're waiting till November 10th, just know that any quality implementer will very, very likely have a backlog wrapping around the building. So anyways, that's really it. It's just really more of a PSA. You can be early, you can be late, but you can't be on time to CMMC. These are the people trying to be exactly on time. If the rule goes into effect November 10th, which it will in all solicitations, you're already technically late, right? Because it takes way longer than 60 days to implement and fully adopt and get certified for CMMC, no matter what solution you're picking. So anyways, that's just a little PSA, just making everyone aware.
Well, why is it a shock? I mean, that's the real question, is why.
I agree.
Why is it a shock? It shouldn't be. The DoD has been very clear that this is a thing that they've been pursuing for a long time. And it's like I tell everybody all the time, I'm like, the period of uncertainty around CMMC was 2021, because they came out with the rule in 2020. Then there was an election and a change in the administration. They went back in to review the program, and they didn't say anything about it for 9 months. And then in November of 2021, so that period of time, like March to November-ish of 2021, was when we're like, what are they going to decide? What is the thing going to be? It didn't seem likely that they were going to can it or pivot very hard away from it because of the national security emergency that precipitated it, and the congressional statutory requirement that said, go do this. But nobody really knew. And then in November, they came out of 2021 and they said, not only are we sticking with the program, we're going to do an additional form of rulemaking to codify the program at 32 CFR, which doesn't mean anything to 99% of people. But if you have an understanding of how rulemaking means, that was like them doubling down administratively on how committed they were to that process. Submitting rules to put regulations at 32 CFR is not easy. I mean, that is a massive, massive undertaking. And so when the administration changed and people got run out of town and new people came in and they still decided that they were going to stick with it, that was the period in time where you were like, it is just a matter of time before it becomes a thing. And then there were all these signals over that period of time that it was still happening. And like I was saying on LinkedIn the other day, in the grand scheme of things, as long as CMMC took, people only got an extra 21 months on top of DoD's original estimate of up to 24 months that it would take them. So it's like, that's a long time, but it's also not a very long time if you haven't started yet.
Well, here's, I got stories, stacks of stories for this. So I talked to a small business, 70 people this week. And I was the one that broke the news that CMMC had happened to them in the sense of the final rule being published. And they were like, wait, what? I was like, yeah. I was like, here's average implementation timeline and backlogs, and here's the impact to the business if you don't do something. And somebody made a note here, and it just says LinkedIn user on our streaming app here, but wouldn't that be a given if you are not making forward progress should be left behind? And the short answer to that is yes. But there are so many people that are hyper unaware that CMMC is even here. They're still kind of running off the coattails of, yeah, my prime just kind of mentioned I need to do this thing, right? They're completely unaware that it is here. It has a date associated with it, which is the first time that's really ever happened, right? November 10th. And so, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what all you're saying. And the people listening to this hotline, like you guys are in the echo chamber for the most part, right? So you guys have been hyper aware and tuned in and making good decisions at where your executives allow you to do that. But there are thousands, tens of thousands of defense contractors that when I'm saying are hyper unaware, they are hyper unaware of the impact this is about to make in 40 business days. Thank you, Luke, for looking that up, by the way.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty. Let's see here. Okay. So
oh boy,
here we go. All right. I've said it all along. It's only FUD if it's not true. All right. So I've been seeing people on LinkedIn and everything being like, all right, all these people are hyping up level 2 certifications during phase 1. And guys, I'm begging you, please read the policy for yourself and just look at with your own eyes how incredibly open-ended the policy is around having level 2 certifications in phase 1. To say nothing of whether or not your prime contractor will require you to have a level 2 certification right now or on phase 1, day 1, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There is no policy that tells the DoD that they cannot require level 2 certification during phase 1. There is no policy that says it needs to be at the end of phase 1. There is no policy that says that small businesses don't need it in phase 1. There is no policy that says that if you get a contract awarded in phase 1 that you don't need the cert until phase 2. None of that is true. None of that is true. It blows my mind when I see people say the people telling everybody that there's going to be level 2 certifications in phase 1 are just peddling FUD and trying to sell you something. And then their counter argument is just completely right. It's just speculation with no basis in policy whatsoever. We did a podcast on this a couple weeks ago. We linked to the 3 pieces of policy that you can go read for yourself. And then you can make up your own mind. But I'm not going to sit here and tell people that they are not likely to see a level 2 certification in phase 1, because if the way of that this rolls out zigs instead of zags, they're screwed. And I'm not going to have that on my conscience, because there isn't a Loctite thing that says there will only be level 2 self-assessments in phase 1. And I cannot stress this enough. People keep pointing to the DoD CIO's website where there's this big yellow banner that says phase 1 self-assessments begin November 10th. PowerPoint and website banners are not policy, right? Your contracting officer and your PM don't care what the banner on the CIO website says. They care what the memo and the guidance in the memo tells them to do. So we're going to talk about this a bunch on our webinar, which is coming up. When is it? I should know this. Coming up on the 24th. I think we got a link in chat for people to register. It's free. We're going to talk all about this. Probably a lot of that webinar is going to be about subcontractor flow down, the likelihood of requiring a cert, the likelihood of, how this is all going to play out. I just put a poll on LinkedIn about this morning. I'm like, okay, before we talk about like let's just go back to this question that got answered in December, right? The question is if your prime contractor is required to get a CMMC level 2 certification and they flow CUI to you, what is the minimum requirement for you, the subcontractor, to achieve? It ain't level 2 self-assessment. It's level 2 certification, right? So the question to ask yourself before anything is, how likely is Lockheed? How likely is Boeing? How likely is Northrop to be required to achieve CMMC level 2, and then flow any of that pertinent data down to you, right? There is nothing at 32 CFR that says, well, they can be required to have a level 2 certification, but that first 12 months, you won't be required to have it. It's not what it says. Let's see here. The actual specific line, 32 CFR 170.23, paragraph A, subparagraph 3. If a subcontractor will process, store, or transmit CUI in performance of the subcontract and the associated prime contract has a requirement for CMMC status of level 2 C3 PAO, then the CMMC status of level 2 C3 PAO is the minimum requirement for the subcontractor. It's been that way, been in effect since December 16th of last year. So please do not assume that you are going to get a level 2 self-assessment just because it's phase 1.
Well, and also, as we've talked about before, Jacob, you've coined this, exceptions and exemptions are for contracts, not contractors. And the other side of that is the prime can receive a requirement for self-attestation, but they can force you through private contracts to require whatever they want to continue to work with them. So you have to realize the primes here are having to mitigate their own risk, because if they have a handful of contracts that have certs and the rest have self-attest, they can't control they don't have probably great data flows on who's sending what type of CUI downstream, certified or self-attest CUI, we'll call it.
Yeah.
So just know there's also a huge amount of corporate risk that they're going to have not having everyone at the same level. And so that's something else just to be very aware of.
Which we talked about on Tuesday. There's a whole section where the government responds to public comments in the final rule where prime contractors were like, hey, we're not responsible for the non-compliance of our subcontractors, right? And the government was like, nah, man, you are absolutely liable for the non-compliance of your subcontractors. They're your subcontractors, and nothing about this agreement indemnifies you from any of that liability. So,
to keep pulling on that thread, I know you and I were talking about this earlier today. So many people, I think I've gotten 4 or 5 questions about conditional CMMC, right? And so no one was using that word before. People wanted to know what the minimal viable product was or solution was to get a contract in this new world. So can we talk about self-attesting and conditional CMMC?
Yeah.
And so kind of one of the things to be aware of is, there is a little bit of a, how do I say this? There's a little bit of a runway if you don't have CMMC fully implemented, even on a self-attestment. So a perfect score would be 110, right? SPRS, perfect score of 110, meaning you've knocked out all 320 assessment objectives. However, the way that CMMC level 2 is written, they're going to give you a conditional CMMC at 88 of 110. So 88 controls met out of 110. Now, there are specific controls that can fall into that, and there are some that can't. So they have to be 1-point controls, but even then, not all 1-point controls will fall into scope of that being able to be used. So you could technically go into a proposal or write a proposal and you have an 88 out of 110 in SPRS and be awarded a contract, but you'll be required to fully remediate that within 6 months of contract award.
Yep.
So just be really aware that this is not a get out of jail free card. This is not a I don't have to do something. This is actually still very, very, very hard to achieve because of the controls that you're allowed to use and not use in calculating that 88 out of 110. So just again, be very aware that there is kind of a minimum CMMC level 2 that you can achieve. It's still incredibly difficult. And because, and this is what I hate about SPRS, Jacob, is it doesn't account for FedRAMP. Like there's an element of it where if you think you're close with conditional, but you're not using things like FedRAMP clouds, which a formal CMMC certification will vet you against, you're going to end up failing a formal cert when that time comes. So you can't fool yourself either. So anyways, everyone just kind of be aware of that. There is a minimum score for CMMC, 88 out of 110, with caveats that you will be able to use. But here's the thing. If I'm a contracting officer and I see somebody with a perfect 110 and somebody with an 88 or a 90 or a 92, my discretion is probably going to lean towards the person with the 110. Now, all that being said, because we all know the famous FCA False Claims Act that the Department of Justice is very hungry to get underway, that you cannot, do not lie about your SPRS score or your CMMC score, I'll call it, right? You need to correctly position what it is, because if it is found out through a whistleblower or through a random DIBCAC high assessment that you have lied about it, the Department of Justice will pursue, and to the tune of typically millions of dollars in damages. So just be aware of that. Just don't put 110 in SPRS, say, yes, we meet the CMMC self-attest requirement, because that will come back and bite you at some point.
Yep. Yeah, and it's a good point about conditional status. You can be awarded a contract with conditional status. That is 100% a thing. And like we said, the 48 CFR final rule implements the policy at 32 CFR 170 that went into effect in December, which is why the new DFARS 204-7502, the policy around how to award contracts, says CMMC levels 2 and 3 can be in a conditional level for a period not to exceed 180 days from the CMMC status date, referencing 170.21. Everything that they declare in 48 CFR says as per 32 CFR 170, as per 32 CFR 170. The award can occur with conditional status. However, if you go to the relevant part of 32 CFR 170 for level 2, for example, they say if that level 2 status expires, right? If you don't close out those POEM items, if it expires in the period of performance, standard contractual remedies will apply, and you're not eligible for anything at that level or higher until the new status is achieved. And they just kind of leave it there. So you can have a contract awarded with conditional status, but it's not a get out of jail free card.
It is not. And to your point, Brian, conditional is a lower level of compliance, a lower evaluation score on all RFPs, likely because contracting officers want to mitigate risk, period, hard stop. Conditional DIB, prime, and sub teams lose contracts. You could very well lose a contract because of this one little variable where somebody scored higher than you under the self-attestment. And Michelle, you had a question here. Understandably getting a lot of questions on self versus certified. Will that be phased starting November 10th? Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Michelle, for reviewing and watching us. Yes, self-attestment will. So we talked about this as well, Jacob. CMMC is not going to go on a few selected contracts starting November 10th. Some sort of designated CMMC level 1, level 2 self-attest, or from the DoD discretion, a certification requirement for L2. All three of those could be applicable starting November 10th.
Yeah.
For all new solicitations.
The phased rollout is not, the phased rollout really is about the CMMC level that they're going to insert. And then they put a huge caveat next to it and they say, except up to our discretion based off the data that you're holding. So phase 1, right? The very beginning of phase 1, the reason that we're saying all new solicitations and contracts after November 10th will have some level of CMMC requirement is because by definition, every solicitation is going to involve federal contract information. And so every solicitation is at least going to have DFARS 7025 and DFARS 7021 that says you must achieve CMMC level 1, right? At a minimum. Now, if that contract involves CUI, then it becomes another question, right? And based off DoD policy, they have instructed their workforce to say, if it's the defense categories of CUI, you must achieve level 2 certification. If it's any of the other forms of CUI, then you can have level 2 self-assessment. So when they say that phase 1 will just be level 2 self-assessment, the question to ask yourself is, well, what about the policy that says if I'm handling controlled technical information, the minimum requirement is level 2 certification? Are you just going to do the exact opposite of the entire reason that the CMMC program exists and just give people CTI and not require them to prove they have implemented the requirements? Like, that wouldn't make any sense at all. The part that they're talking around, right, is that a lot more people handle CTI. Like, the other forms of CUI in the registry are just not very common for defense contractors, right? Like, we're not talking about asylum information or tax information or whatever, right? We're talking controlled technical information. We're talking naval nuclear propulsion information, all that kind of stuff. So if you're out there and you're like putting precision parts on missiles and fighter jets, right, then you're not dealing with the categories of CUI in the rest of the registry. So I just do not see, we've talked about this in the podcast. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills because I just do not see it in policy as it exists, a prohibition on level 2 certification in the first 12 months. And all we do is talk to people every day who handle this type of information. On top of that, the fact that if the prime contractor requires it, then you're going to require it. And there's just so many reasons that are stacked up towards you are more likely to see a level 2 certification in the first 12 months than not, that I cannot in good conscience tell people, oh yeah, there's a chance that you won't see it, right? Like, that just does not seem likely. It doesn't seem smart. I feel like I would be doing a disservice to people if I was like, yeah, you're probably good for 12 months.
Well, and let's go ahead and say this, Jacob. If the DoD didn't plan to want this as part of phase 1, they wouldn't have released any sort of clarifying memo until closer to phase 2 start. So again, it's one of those things where it's like, why did they release the memo prior to phase 1? It's like, well, they did because they wanted people to understand what discretion was inside of their contracting officer base. So anyways.
Let's see. Julian asked if you could get that section again. I believe you were talking about the section that talks about requirements for subs. If the primes require level 2 cert, it should be 170, 32 CFR 170, 23. So if we scroll down here, gosh, what a big regulation. Am I right? Application to subcontractors. Huge. So this is DoD policy for the CMMC program that went into effect in December, right? So the policy of CMMC applying to subcontractors, right? So it applies to subcontractors throughout the supply chain, blah, blah, blah. If you only deal with FCI, then the status of CMMC level 1 self-assessment is the requirement. If you're going to deal with CUI, then the minimum requirement is level 2 self-assessment. But if a subcontractor will process, store, transmit CUI in the performance of the subcontractor, and the prime contractor was required to achieve level 2 C3PAO, a level 2 cert, then the minimum requirement for the sub is level 2 certification as well. So the question is not whether you individually can get a level 2 self-assessment or not. It's whether your prime was able to get a level 2 self-assessment or not. And if you're doing work for fighter jets and satellites, then almost certainly on the prime contract we're required to get a level 2 certification. And as we know from the way that the primes operate, they're probably not going to carve out and caveat this data in such a way that they minimize it for you in order to help you out. They're going to mitigate their risk and just say, go get the level 2 cert.
Yep, absolutely. So this is just a picture of what Jacob just said. So the only kind of nuance here is CMMC level 3, which is like 1% of the addressable space, where you could either be L3 as a sub or L2 certified. But outside of that, if you have CUI to level 2, it's either certified prime, certified sub, self-attest prime, the ability to self-attest as a sub. But again, because prime and sub relationships are private, the prime can technically dictate whatever requirement they want on your work, right? Flow down to you. So again, it's minimal. It's minimum would be the requirement the DoD is outlining. So
yeah. For let's see, Julian, that specific section in let's see here. That specific section is 170.23, application to subcontractors. This is 32 CFR section 170.23, specifically paragraph 3. If a subcontractor will process, store, transmit CUI in performance of the contract and the associated prime contract requires level 2 certification, then level 2 certification is the minimum requirement for the sub. So that's the real question to ask yourself. And like we said, none of the policy around the phased rollout caveats that policy declaration. They don't say, oh, if the primes need level 2 cert in phase 1, the subs don't, right? Policy says if the primes need it, you need it. And the other guidance says if you handle this type of data, then you need the level 2 cert. So if you're on a subcontract involving that type of data, you're going to need the level 2 cert, whether it's phase 1 or not, because maybe the solicitation comes out towards the end of phase 1. They don't award it until after phase 2 starts. The phased rollout, as far as we can see, is pretty much irrelevant because that's not overriding policy, right? All right.
Here's another good one, just to continue that just for one more minute. I understand CMMC would apply to all new and renewing contracts. Is there an expectation a prime may request certification from sub for an existing contract where renewal may be months or years away? So one thing to be aware of, the way that CMMC is written, CMMC can be introduced if they so desire at contract option years, and they can decide if they want to do a modification of your contract to include it. Now, what we have been told is that's going to be incredibly rare for existing in-flight contracts, but contract option years are very clearly stated as the ability for the DoD to slide in CMMC requirements. But here's the reason your prime might want to have that ahead of that renewal date or extension date. Because number one, they have to know if you can continue to perform on that contract. So they're going to need you certified well before, so that they have confidence that they're not waiting to the last minute to know that they can actually renew and continue the contract through the option year. So yes, I would say there'll be a very strong expectation that your requirement to be certified ahead of any renewal or extensions of option years will most definitely be required by your prime.
Yeah. There was a line, I'm seeing if I can try to find it. I don't have it memorized yet, but there's a line in there.
Also, slide deck available for download. It's not. This is the slide deck that me and the marketing team have created. Jacob has obviously done it as well. If you want to message me on LinkedIn and any specific slides, I can definitely send some of those over to you.
Yeah. There's a line in the final rule, the 48 CFR final rule. I'll have to find it later, but it's something around the lines of like subcontractors have to comply just like their primes do. It's really just a function of the data, which is really the catalyst for this whole program to begin with. So it would make sense that that's,
requirement follows the data,
at least high level policy there. So, okay. Let's see here. So this was an interesting question that we've seen in the past. I saw it on Reddit this morning. Daniel, somebody was asking for recommendations for managed providers, specifically for GCC High. And they said, well, we need CMMC level 2, so we need GCC High. Is that true?
It's not. So when we're looking at the Microsoft stack, you can't use Microsoft Commercial because it's no longer a FedRAMP cloud as of October of last year. So we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of Microsoft stripping away FedRAMP authorization or choosing not to continue it. So that leaves you 2 available options in the Microsoft stack, GCC and GCC High. So GCC is an impact level 2 environment that can hold what they call basic CUI. So CUI that does not have requirements around no foreign, and CUI that doesn't include export control requirements like ITAR, EAR, et cetera. Technically, basic CUI was actually a little bit more robust than that, but anyways, we won't get into that on this call. So basically, the decision you need to make is both current state and future state. And the reason I say that is, if you don't ever anticipate having export control or no foreign data, period, you could actually get compliant in a Microsoft GCC cloud. If you anticipate ever going into into export control space at all, or you don't want to rule yourself out of being able to pursue that, you would need to go GCC High. So you gotta have a pretty big decision to make depending on the types of data you work with. It might not be a decision at all, and you know which one because you deal with ITAR, right? By the way, controlled technical information falls into export control, right? So just kind of broad stroke, CTI, supporting Department of State, Department of Commerce, export control regulations as well. Space and military applications. So distribution statements, B through F, also export control. So most of the people in the space, especially manufacturers, some in the construction space, but a lot of manufacturers and research fall into that CTI export control space. So out of 1,200 or so clients that we have, all in the defense space, whether partial or full business, I would say maybe 2% of our portfolio are in GCC, 98% are in GCC High, again, just to hedge their bets and not have to migrate, which is very painful, to GCC High at a later date.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Is the waiver process still in 32 CFR 170? Yes. So 32 CFR 170 went into effect in December of 2024 until more rulemaking updates 32 CFR 170. That guidance has not changed and will not change. So the program policy at 32 CFR 170 that covers everything from roles and responsibilities, CMMC levels, waivers, conditional status, POAMs, all that stuff is set in stone. It will not change until the next 32 CFR CMMC rule is final and effective. So in the future, there's going to be a proposed rule for something that you could casually refer to as CMMC 3.0. Obviously, they need to update CMMC to point to 171 Rev 3. They got to, adjust the program, whatever. They're going to propose the rule. They're going to take public comments. They're going to adjudicate the comments. They're going to publish a final rule. Then it will go into effect. That will change the guidance at 32 CFR 170. That doesn't mean that the waiver guidance is going to change, but that's the only time that it could change. And that's still, if they published the proposed rule tomorrow, it would still be a year away. I have seen no indications that they're planning to publish that rule anytime soon. So you're talking 2 years, 3 years, maybe until that guidance changes. So yeah, it's still there. Waiver guidance specifically is at 32 CFR 170.5, I believe. Is that right, chat? Did I get this correct here? It should be 170.5 policy, 170.5D policy. Let's pull this up real quick. 170.5D, in very limited circumstances and in accordance with all applicable policies, procedures, requirements, a service acquisition executive or component acquisition executive in the DoD or as delegated may elect to waive inclusion of CMMC program requirements in a solicitation or a contract. In such cases, contractors and subs will remain obligated to comply with all applicable cybersecurity and information security requirements. So maybe 15 people, a dozen people or so in the entire DoD can waive the CMMC requirements at the contract level, which is why we say that waivers are for contracts, not for individual contractors. And this is a pre-solicitation process. So if you see the solicitation come out on sam.gov and it says CMMC level 2 C3PAO status required, that means that they have determined that they will get enough bids that they can award it to somebody with that status. They did not have a lower status or they didn't waive the requirement. So by the time you see the requirement, it's too late for them to waive it at the contract level. Also, this should set off your spidey senses as a contractor. If the program office has determined that they will get enough people to bid on the contract who have the cert and you don't have the cert, that means that there are enough people besides you to do the work, right? Yep. So they're not waiting on you. They've determined there are enough people that can do it. So if you see the flash go off on the horizon, it's already too late. You have to have it ready to go because, as we talked about before, the period of time between solicitation and award is typically not long enough for people to go from zero to certified. You have to already be well down the road toward certification in order to have enough time by the time the solicitation comes out. So it's still in there. And then the guidance in the 48 CFR rule, when they talk about waivers, basically says that during the phased rollout, unless they have waived the requirements according to 170.5D, then it's up to the discretion of the DoD how they're going to roll everything out. And as we talked about in the policy, that's dictated by data identity, not by anything else. So, yep, it's still in there. Let's see here.
We got another one here. Kimberly. Can we talk about UIDs? Primes are required to keep track and prove to contracting officer every subs UID in all tiers in the supply chain that process CUI. Is that correct? So I'm going to pull up, I was looking this up while you were talking, Jacob. So specifically this section right here via the response. The rule clarifies that only prime contractors with the CMMC requirement will be required to submit CMMC UIDs to the contracting officer for any contract information system that will process, store, or transmit FCI or CUI during the performance, which may include the DoD UIDs associated with the contractor information systems of the prime subcontractors, which may. Subcontractors do not have a requirement to submit CMMC UIDs to the contracting officer. As with subcontract requirement, the prime will need to work with the subcontractor to obtain the subcontractor CMMC UIDs if applicable. So long story short, yes, there could easily be a case where the DoD or where the primes, would need to collect evidence of what your DoD UID is, aka your assessment boundary. For those that don't know what a DoD UID is, it's basically the collection of assets that determine your boundary. So we use the term enclave a lot. So you could have a cage code, which is a physical site representation, and then a DoD UID, which is an enclave that's servicing that cage code or even collection of cage codes. So it's just basically what are all the assets and what's kind of wrapped in that boundary where the CUI will be processed or transmitted, or FCI in the case of CMMC level 1.
Yep. Absolutely. Let's see here. Phase 1 contract awards won't require certification until the start of phase 2, right? Wrong. That is not true. So if, let's say on November 12th, at 2 days into the phased rollout, a solicitation comes out and it gets awarded the next day, right? So you get awarded a contract that requires CMMC. Well, let's back up. Solicitation comes out in phase 1 and it says you need to get a CMMC level 2 certification. You have until phase 2 to get that certification. That is not true. You need the certification in order to take award of that contract.
Yes.
So that contract is being awarded in phase 1 and it says that's the requirement. That's the requirement that you need. Phase 1 doesn't matter, right? The DoD has said that they want to ramp things up in phase 1. The DoD said that they want to have self-assessments in phase 1. But if you read in the rules, we're going to talk about this in the podcast coming up, and we'll talk about this on the webinar. The DoD has no idea where their data goes, who's handling the data. They're not even legally allowed to ask what's going on the other side of the prime contractors. They don't know. No. All the estimates for the number of companies that are affected are minimum estimates. So people are like, hey, they revised this estimate from 80,000 to like 100,000 at level 2. They don't know. That's always been a minimum estimate because they can't see anything beyond what's registered in their system for direct awards. And they only assume, we were talking about this earlier, Daniel, in their impact estimate, they assume that for every prime, there's 5 subs.
Yep.
5.
By the way, it says in it, an expert has determined that, or has determined that. It's like, wait, what experts are assuming 5 subs per prime? Like, where did that come from? And the short answer is none of us know, right? None of us know where that came from. So
yeah, that's always fun. They always say subject matter experts were referenced because they don't have the data, so they reference subject matter experts. No one knows who those SMEs are. You will never know who those SMEs are. It might have been somebody's golden doodle. That's the subject matter expert around these parts. But you'll never know. And because there isn't any data, then there's, that's the best that they've got. And so they're kind of just, they're wags, right? Like they don't know. So I've always said that 80,000 number, that's the floor for the number of people affected by CMMC level 2. So now I think that the percentage breakdown is probably a little more accurate. I don't know if we have that table pulled up where they've got
it right here.
Yeah,
I knew you were queuing it up.
So the actual number of companies, they don't really know, but the percentage of the breakdown might be more accurate because they may have a better idea of whether or not these contracts involve defense categories of CUI at the very highest level or not, right? Like, is it something for missiles? Is it something for fighter jets? Is it something for this? Is it something for, a new fence at a military base? I don't know, right? But like, I feel like maybe the percentage is a more accurate way of looking at it rather than the entire specific number. And when you look at it that way, it's like not a lot of people are going to get level 2 self-assessments. Like,
2%. Okay.
Right.
For people that are like hanging their hat on minimal viable, self-attest, like, listen, it's going to apply to me. I have high confidence. This table says you should have very low confidence that you're going to not have to be certified at some point if you're working with CUI, right? I mean, 62% level 1 only, meaning only FCI. CMMC level 2 self-attest, 2% for self-attesting with CUI, 35% for certification, and then 1% for CMMC level 3. So again, looking at this, and I don't know how they're deeming, and maybe you know, Jacob, small versus large entities. I don't know what their breakpoint is. I don't know if it's employee or revenue, depending on NACE or how they even came up with that delineation. But yeah, guys, like be ready. 80,000 companies or 118,000 requiring certification. Only 6,800 are going to be able to self-attest at this point. So again, these are numbers. I think to Jacob's point, this is probably the floor, not the ceiling. These are just best guesses and estimates that the DoD has today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Scott, you chimed in. I believe that the CMMC level 3 number might be low, especially with Golden Dome stuff. Jacob, I know you guys did a podcast about Golden Dome and kind of an internal DoD memo that's been circulating around publicly. And I mean, Golden Dome comes out there, level 3 is definitely in that language. So
yeah, if you're in the Golden Dome GDA supply chain, then I think that's a something to have your keep your ears to the ground, because this leaked memo that hasn't been published yet said that's going to be a trigger for level 3. The other big indicator is if you have received a DIBCAC high assessment, not a joint surveillance assessment that was run with DIBCAC and a C3PAO. If the DoD auditors from the DIBCAC team called you and said, we want to give you a full assessment against 800-171, what's known as a DIBCAC high assessment, those are not random lotteries. Those, and if you talk to people who've had them, they're almost always doing some pretty slick, high-speed stuff. And based off what we've heard and been told over the years, that's a strong indicator that the DoD is very interested in the things that you're doing, and that you would be a likely candidate to receive CMMC level 3 requirements, which is good and bad. It's bad because it's a lot of work. It's good because you can roll a lot of your costs under the umbrella of these new requirements, because they are legitimately new requirements. So the DoD is expecting your rates to go through the roof. I mean, they've estimated costs in the millions to comply with CMMC level 3. So if you've been, cutting a corner here or there, kind of fudging a number here or there, waiting on a refresh here and there, and you get the level 3 status, then boom, they're expecting your rates to go up. If you are not level 3, then your implementation cost doesn't stem from CMMC. It stems from DFARS 7012. And the DoD is not expecting your rates to go up, because your existing rates were supposed to include the cost of this implementation. And that's a bad situation. So being level 3 is not necessarily the worst thing. It is a lot of work, though.
Yes, it is a lot of work.
All righty, let's see here. Is there a small business exemption for? No, there is not. They do not have the phased rollout based off of business size, and they do not change the requirements based off of business size, because the requirements, as you said, Daniel, follow the nature of the data. And so if the data flows down to you and you are a small business, there is no separate set of requirements. 800-171 is the minimum baseline for the requirements, regardless of the size of the organization. Now, that obviously is very regressive for smaller organizations, but this has been covered in DoD policy for many, many, many years at this point. They see 171 as the minimum standard, not the ceiling. And so if 171 feels like a large lift for you, it depends on your size, essentially, right? So there is no small business exemption. There is no small business offset. There is no small business phased rollout. There is no change just because you happen to be small. There also is no change based off of the amount of the covered data that you handle. If you only handle a small amount of the data, same minimum requirement as somebody who handles a ton of the regulated data. There is no carve out that way. Let's see. I think there was some.
Dark green. These are questions are the ones that were typically seen about 2 years ago. Welcome to all the new viewers. We welcome all questions here.
Absolutely.
Right? So dark green, you are right. We've answered this question many times over the past few years. Anyways, it's always good to circle the wagon occasionally here. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Section 23 of the public comment responses in the final rule. Somebody was asking, DoD should consider relief for CMMC demands in exceptional circumstances. small business entities should be exempted from CMMC level 2 requirements when they are second tier suppliers and not receiving information flowed to the prime. And the DoD responds that the rule at 32 CFR 170, that was the policy that went into effect in December. The 48 CFR rule that we got a couple days ago does not change that policy in any way. According to CMMC policy, that established the requirements for CMMC and does not include an exemption for exceptional circumstances. Therefore, the DFARS rule is unable to make that change because it's implementing that policy. DoD does not require the flow down of requirements to subs that do not receive FCI or CUI. If you don't receive the data, then the requirements don't go with the data, so you don't have to prove that you implemented them via CMMC, right? Like we always, like I've said for a while, I think we coined this on the 32 CFR webinar back in the day. It was like CMMC is not making you do the requirements. It's making sure you did the requirements. So if you don't have to do the requirements for whatever reason, you don't have to do CMMC. If you do have to do the requirements, then CMMC becomes your problem. So the determination related to CMMC implementation plan timeline was made in 32 CFR 170. Thus, the DFARS rule is unable to change the CMMC program rule. It's just implementing policy that went into effect in December.
So Blake has a pretty good question here. What if RFP document or project drawings remarks CUI, but only 1/20 of the document is really CUI based on some aspect of build, rest is not, prime needs level 2. What about fencing subs? So just be aware that, again, to Jacob's point, the requirement follows the data. So if they're not flowing down the CUI elements to you, this is where companies like DefCert and Ryan Bonner come very useful for supply chain risk mitigation, is because there are ways to break apart the information to not have to flow down the CUI bits, we'll call it. But you have to be very in tune with what those requirements are in order to mitigate having to flow down CMMC certs to your supply chain. So if the CUI doesn't go down, if the FCI doesn't go down, Jacob, again, to your point, you don't have to flow these things downstream, right? If it's a COTS product, if this whole big thing is CUI, or this one little piece is CUI, but the whole big thing is not, it's COTS products that you're sourcing materials for, guess what you can do? You can source the COTS products without having to flow down the CMMC requirements. So yes, long story short, but if you end up with that one little piece of CUI, the certification or the self-attestment, whatever the requirement is at a minimum at the contract level or set by your prime, is going to be required. The kindest thing you can do as a prime is to dissect what you have and strategically flow down pieces that are non-CUI and therefore having to force CMMC on your subs. But guess what? We've been at this a long time. Nobody does that, and very few people have a plan to actually do it. So
well, here's a question. Here's a question for you, chat. Let us know what you think. Daniel and I have had a little bet on the side because, as we talked about, Daniel, the rules and the updates and the policy memos really don't move the needle for most defense contractors. Memos and blogs from the mega primes get people's attention. So when Lockheed Martin publishes a supplier update on their blog, that's when people really take notice, which is crazy, but that's just the way the world works. And we were betting, hey, the final rule is out. We have the official start date for phase 1. When is Lockheed going to put their supplier guidance out? My prediction was it was going to be before the end of the week. I thought it was going to be today. You thought it was going to be the beginning of next week. It doesn't. They as before we started the stream, they didn't have it up. So now I have a gut feeling that Lockheed isn't going to put their blog out until like the day phase 1, day 1. They're going to put November it out on. They're going to put it out and say, "Hey, everybody, the rule's in effect. Hope you're ready. We'll call you soon." What do you guys think? Do you think that Lockheed's going to post it on the effective date, or do you think they're going to give everybody a heads up and before the effective date? I'll tell you this, the previous blogs, they didn't post until the rules went into effect or until after they went into effect. So like when the proposed rule came out, they would publish something a little while after saying, hey, the proposed rule is out. Please keep working on 171 implementation. The final rule went into effect in December. They published a blog on the effective date that said, hey, it went into effect. Here, are they going to publish a blog on phase 1, day 1, or are they going to publish it early? What do you guys think? Let us know. Let us know in the comments below.
Well, and I can tell you right now, behind the scenes, that I've already heard opcos and other companies being like losing work because they're not far enough along in their CMMC. We heard through a little birdie from a mega prime that their plan is to require certification for all subs. So just kind of be aware of that. Again, we cannot disclose where that came from, but we have heard the overall strategy of the primes, again, to mitigate their risk, because they don't know if they're flowing down self-attest CUI or certified CUI, we'll call it. They have to mitigate that, and they usually mitigate that by requiring the highest bar. In this case, a certification would be there. Also, Stephen, you said really nice things about us. Jacob, it looks like we're getting in shape, my friend. So
hey, we're turning into CMMC super soldiers out here.
You know how to get your comment on the screen. I appreciate that, Stephen.
Yeah, just compliments. I'll tell you what the secret is. Don't use a golf cart, walk the course, and go to jiu-jitsu class, and the pounds will melt away very quickly.
That's it.
Yeah, that's my secret. Also, nothing helps.
A lot of kettlebells. So.
Nothing helps process the haters around CMMC that you deal with on LinkedIn all day, like going to jiu-jitsu class after work and strangling your friends. It is very cathartic. Nice. Highly recommended if you guys are dealing with the CMMC flat earthers out there, as we sometimes call them. All right, Blake said, we've asked for redacted RFP drawings from the DoD without CUI, and what we received was useless. We can't redact as a prime, I don't believe. Yeah, that's very true, especially in manufacturing situations, because a lot of times the nature of the data that you require to make the thing is itself considered controlled technical information. Yeah. Like a lot of times you can't separate the CUI from the data that you need as the manufacturer to do the thing that you're on contract for. Sometimes you can manipulate this in terms of you don't need that data to flow throughout the entire business. But a lot of times you're going to have literal CTI for like your quality processes, and your quality systems are ingrained in the nature of the data itself. All that information is in your ERP, is the nerve center of your company. I mean, this stuff is everywhere in these manufacturing environments. So then you kind of have to rely on scoping guidance for like, okay, what can we keep out of scope on the shop floor and who actually needs it? But when quality data is itself often CTI, and quality systems have become the way that the business is structured, then you end up with CTI across the entire scope of the business. It's very, very difficult to re-engineer your business processes. And a lot of times it's just not worth the money. It'd be more expensive to do that than it would be for most of, if not all of your business to be in scope. I just don't think that the DoD is ever going to come up with a process where they're going to redact CUI. The primes aren't going to redact CUI. I've gotten DMs. I've heard from people in the field where they've just said, we're going to hide the primes or the requiring activities, like entire syscoms have said, we're just going to high watermark level 2 C3PAO requirement and call it a day. Because if everybody gets level 2 C3PAO, we don't have to do all this extra work, if that work is even possible in the first place.
CUI with CUI. I hate to say it, but that is going to be the standard. I just don't see a way around it. People by nature want to mitigate risk, and that's risk to them not having that. So
yeah, absolutely. There's an interesting part of the final rule for people who think that for it's relevant, because a lot of people do work on task orders and delivery orders. If you guys are familiar, we did a podcast. We've talked about this for a long time. The thing to pay attention to, the most important metric for strategizing around CMMC, in my opinion, is the PALT window for your customer. The procurement administrative lead time window, the time period between a contract solicitation and the time that it is awarded. That includes task orders and delivery orders. Task orders and delivery orders go from solicitation to award very, very quickly, sometimes in a matter of days or hours, depending on which DoD component you're talking about. Specifically, DLA does this very quickly. And so there were public comments around orders-based work, and somebody was requesting clarification on whether existing indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts that have task orders and delivery orders after publication of the final DFARS rule will contain a CMMC requirement. Great question. The IDIQ is already awarded, but there's going to be orders-based work after the phased rollout begins. What is the DoD going to do? They say the rule prescribes the use of the solicitation provision and the contract clause in certain solicitations and contracts, task orders, and delivery orders. Therefore, task orders or delivery orders issued after this rule takes effect may include the requirement for CMMC. So how lucky are you feeling? right? How lucky are you feeling that the people issuing the order-based work are going to not require what current DoD policy says? I wouldn't take that gamble.
No.
What'll be very interesting, we heard this at Gold Coast 2 years ago. Missile Defense Agency was talking about how they want to do orders-based work very quickly. And so they are going to explore the idea of putting task orders work on GSA paper, as they say. So you could see CMMC requirements in GSA solicitations for Missile Defense Agency task orders because the DoD wants to go faster, right? So, yeah, I thought that was an interesting detail in the rule there. Let's see here. People are asking about the SMEs. Okay, is CMMC certification a requirement to bid on the contract? No, never has been, and never will be, honestly. You do not have to have the cert to bid. You have to have the cert to take award of the contract. However, if the window between solicitation and award is very short, you necessarily have to be working on CMMC before the solicitation comes out in order to complete all of the work and get your cert by the time the award happens. So you don't need it to bid, but you do need it to take award.
And again, to Jacob's point, the PALT window is like on average 32 days or something like that.
Yeah.
So like, again, you can't get certified. You can't build an environment, get certified, or even just get certified within that amount of time. So it's got to be a lot of planning ahead of time.
Let's see. Steven says, do you guys think there will be significant enough of a reduction in the supply chain because contractors haven't met the requirements or don't want to by the time the requirement shows up on the contracts, to the point where the KOs will take redaction more seriously and reduce the flow down of CUI? I have no idea.
No way.
I have no idea.
I don't think so. Because of education. Like, the only CUI training that people get is the same free CUI training that everyone distills from the DoD. Again, we're going back to CYA. I think that they're going to continue to flow down and say either do it or don't, not my problem. If they get one bid, they get one bid, they'll sole source it and move on. I really don't think you would have to retrain or practically train like every major person inside of the DoD for the understanding of what's CUI and what's not. And that reform is so far out, I think. So I would not expect anything to change from that level of behavior at all. I mean, I could be wrong. I'd love to be wrong, because it would allow the inclusion of more subs and primes in the overall ecosystem for the most part. But like, why do we think the DoD would change behavior if they can get at least one company to come do the work?
Yeah. And I think Brian has a good point. And this is something that we've heard from contracting officers, former contracting officers. They're like, I have a minimum number of bids that I need, and if I have more than that, it's just more work for me. Right. It is not the contracting officer's responsibility to try to foster a lot of companies in the supply chain. It's not Lockheed Martin's business model to have a bunch of redundant suppliers in the supply chain, right? It is not up to the contract workforce or the system of defense contracting that we have in this country to stand in for a lack of overall national industrial policy, right? If we want to have a large, vibrant, humongous number of defense contracts across the supply chain, then we have to have policy that will keep those companies around, right? Lockheed's not going to do it. The KO's not going to do it. We need 3 bids. We need 5 bids. We need 7 bids. They don't need 70. They don't need 700. They don't need 7,000. And so the question to ask yourself is, if you're saying, well, I'm going to wait on getting CMMC, are there 3 other competitors besides you that would be doing this work that have the cert? Because if there are, then they're not in a bind to get the bid from you, right?
Well, and people ask all the time about small businesses and set-asides. CMMC trumps set-aside requirements. Yes, the DoD has an ideal quota of working with small businesses. They do. It's a public document out there. I think they publish it every year, right? What their new target is. I think they failed almost every year at this point. But CMMC trumps set-asides. So again, if you're a small business, disabled-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned, if you check all of the letters and don't have CMMC, the required level, they cannot give you the work. So just be aware of that. CMMC trumps set-aside requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody said, how many contracts will include level 2 self-assessment in phase 1? We don't know. Nobody knows. Based off of what is in the 32 CFR final rule from December, they estimate a certain number, maybe around 2% of all contracts that'll be out there for the DoD. In their estimate, they basically caveat everything and they go, we don't really know. In the latest 48 CFR rule, there's a line in there that says, even all the, what is it? It's even with all the estimates, like everything is completely up to, DoD anticipates the following mix. I'll bring this up real quick. Yeah. DoD anticipates the following mix of self-assessments and certificates will occur starting in year 4. However, it is likely to change based on component program office discretion, whether a CMMC status is required, and if so, at what CMMC level. Long story short, they don't know.
They don't.
It's not going to be a signal flare that goes up on November 10th and they said, okay, self-assessments for everybody and only for these people over here and those people over there. The policy goes into effect on November 10th, and then whatever your customer, your prime, that PM, that KO in that specific situation determined based off their discretion is what your experience in the phase rollout is going to be. And it's very difficult to predict. So that's why we encourage everybody, based off the open-ended nature of this policy that we've now seen them reinforce multiple times across multiple rules, it's very dangerous for you to assume that there will be a delay, that there will be an exception, there will be a self-assessment for you. There's just a lot of reasons to believe that it will be the opposite situation. So take that into consideration in your contract threat model, if you will, and make the decision based off that information. That's that's all we can recommend for folks. All right. Already in an hour, Daniel. Already an hour.
I love it. Time flies. We're having fun.
Yeah, we didn't get to all of the questions. We almost never can get to all of the questions, but that's not a big deal because we do this every Friday. So if we didn't get to your question, we will add it to the queue for next week. You can submit comments if you find this stream afterwards on YouTube or LinkedIn. You can always DM us. We always get lots and lots of awesome questions and DMs, either via email or via DMs, because people don't want to ask them publicly. Totally understandable. You go to CUIHotline.org and you can call the number, leave your question over there. You can fill out the form, especially if it's a longer, more complicated question. That's a great option for including everything. We have a webinar coming up on the 24th. It's free. We're going to cover everything you need to know about the 48 CFR final rule, and more specifically and importantly, how to strategize for what's coming up in phase 1. This is no longer the domain of speculating about what the next rule is going to say. We've got both pieces for the policy. We have a day for when it goes into effect. So now the question is, what is the smartest way to strategize? That's what we're going to be talking about on the 24th.
Yep.
Next week, we'll be in Dallas for Summit 7 Live, so check that out. We'll be in Huntsville for Summit 7 Live right after that. We'll be there for National Cyber Summit. We're going to be all over the place. Check out our website and find out where we're going to be. Get a hold of us, and we'll see you guys next week.
See y'all next week.